In British Columbia, just an hour outside of Canada's third largest city, is Garibaldi Provincial Park. It is so untouched, it has been designated a wilderness park.
Where else can you go that's an hour and a half out of Vancouver and come to a place that was formed by a combination of the glacier and the volcanic activity? I love this place so much because it's got a lot of history attached to it. Here, I mean, I can feel part of something that's bigger than me.
The park is home to more than 100 glaciers.
Garibaldi Park without glaciers would not be Garibaldi Park.
It's also home to a mammal with a reputation for fierceness.
Large protected areas like Garibaldi are a stronghold for wolverine, and their presence is kind of an indicator of wilderness.
But right now, Garibaldi's glaciers and wolverines are in danger.
In a sense, glaciers are a bit like a canary in a coal mine. They're an indicator that something is amiss.
As often as she can, Kathy Ross makes the one-hour drive from her home in Vancouver to Garibaldi Provincial Park in southwestern British Columbia.
I've been coming to the park for a long time. I'm a frequent user, and lately I've been coming in here doing historical research on the beginnings of the park.
The former police investigator stumbled on some photos in a park research station, which documented Garibaldi's transition from Alpine Playground to Provincial Park. Her detective skills kicked in.
I initially came across some old files, and they were all dusty and all in disarray. So I volunteered and said, you know, I'll take care of that and sort them out. I sort of developed a passion for it, and putting all the pieces of the puzzle together and figuring out how Garibaldi Park came to be.
Forming a deep bond with the land, like Kathy has, is something that is very common for this place. Mount Garibaldi, or Chakai as it's known by the Squamish Nation, is the mountain that gave the park its name. In the 1800s, mountaineers began exploring the area, and in 1927, Garibaldi became a provincial park. While investigating the origins of the park, Kathy also discovered that a family, the Brandvolds, blazed the first trail into Garibaldi in the early 1940s. Hans Brandvold is the eldest son of the family. He remembers his parents' love for the park.
The beauty struck them right off the bat. I remember Mom always mentioning that. And then there was the intimacy of being here. You got into an area where the mountains were close enough, but they were far enough away that it's sort of almost like the mountains were putting their arms around you, you know?
The Brandvold family started bushwhacking their way up to the Diamond Head area in 1944.
The original idea was to build a string of small cabins that people, mountaineering people, could, you know, go from one to the other in a reasonable amount of time and be able to safely stay in bad weather.
It was a huge endeavor, and they self-financed the entire operation.
They used to haul all the material in on the backs and behind the horses. You know, you're talking a good 7 to 10 kilometers. They're pulling this gear back and forth and continuously. And then in harsh weather, I mean, they were working well into the winter. And the final finish of the building, they actually had 15 feet of snow inside the building when they put the roof on it. It's quite the grind, I'd say.
The Brandvolds' Diamond Head Chalet provided shelter and food to thousands of Garibaldi's visitors for over 30 years.
I think that's an interesting thing. This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen, all for free. No subscription required.
We still get visitors up here today saying, I skied up here 50 years ago and I remember when I had soup in there. And it's a special place for old-timers and young-timers. The Brandvold family's vision was to bring public up into the park and share its beauty with everybody. Essentially, our vision is the same. We want to protect this place for one, but also be able to bring people up here and have them appreciate it for all it has to offer.
Garibaldi is adjacent to Whistler, the famous ski destination. But unlike its busy counterpart, Garibaldi offers its visitors a pristine wilderness experience. Garibaldi is filled with mountains, volcanoes, and over 100 glaciers.
Garibaldi is just an incredible world-class special place. And what makes Garibaldi so special is this fantastic interplay between volcanic activity and glacial activity that occurs in the park, and the features that were left after the Ice Age came to an end about 10,400 years ago.
Garibaldi's visitors access its spectacular views under their own steam, hiking or skiing its trails. Ranger Katie Chambers makes sure park users stay safe in the backcountry.
We try to keep people to core area and on the trails and let the wildlife have free reign of the rest of the terrain. Part of my duties today is to reset our orange wand route, marking the route into the backcountry to our backcountry cabin. So I'm just going to replant those poles to ensure public safety.
Public safety may be ensured, but there's an unseen danger at Garibaldi jeopardizing the very things that keep visitors coming back. Climate warming is threatening the park's glaciers and wildlife.
Sphinx Glacier is another alpine glacier on the south side of Garibaldi Lake, and it's significant because it also has seen a tremendous amount of glacial retreat over the last 100 years or so. It's a pretty good evidence of glacial warming. All of the glaciers in Garibaldi Park are retreating, clearly showing that our climate is warming up.
We as a civilization have some hard choices ahead. We have to think about, do we like our lifestyle? Do we like our multiple cars, our big houses, or are we willing to reduce our fossil fuel consumption?
Today, a crisis looms over Garibaldi Provincial Park.
So if Steve is able to hear, this is the Helm Glacier again. That's dramatically retreated since I first visited in the late 60s.
An increase in the CO2 level is warming the planet, putting Garibaldi at risk.
So in Garibaldi Provincial Park, we have over 100 individual glaciers, and that seems like a lot. But over the last 20 years, we've seen a shrinkage of about 8 to 10%.
So there's Steve, and
a good example is Helm Glacier. It's a very well-known glacier in British Columbia, and at the rate it's thinning and retreating, it will be gone in 2 or 3 decades.
Glaciers need cold temperatures and high elevations to form.
Glaciers are like conveyor belts. They take snow that gets transformed into ice, and they convey it down to lower elevations where it melts away, and it's a continuous process.
But if the climate warms, the snow doesn't accumulate and the existing snowpack melts.
Over the decades, I've definitely seen glaciers receding. Typically in the summertime, witnessed a lot more dramatic climate events. So we'll get more hot spells, more rain events, seems more severe.
Yeah, watch your step here.
Brian Manunis and John Clegg are environmental research scientists. They are studying the effects of climate change on Garibaldi's glaciers.
A few tenths of centimeters. Whoa.
Not very thick. Well, one of the things that we're doing in Garibaldi is trying to understand how glaciers have changed over the last 10 to 12,000 years. So one of the things that we can do is we can core lakes like the lake you see behind us here by looking at the amount of sediment that gets into the lake through time. And we get a great snapshot of changes in these glaciers through thousands of years.
Safe. We're just going to have to still be careful, though.
Yeah, we have to be careful, but I think...
The research Brian and John gather can only be collected in the field. Despite the freezing temperatures, winter is the best time to do it because they can stand on the ice to collect sediment samples.
Well, we're in business.
But we definitely want to be careful. Because you fall into this lake now, and if you don't get out in 2 minutes, you're dead.
It's serious, yeah.
This is a risky job, but the payoff is important.
Well, this looks pretty good. Let's try this. Through the second one.
Okay, Brian, you want to back off out of that, and I'll get the thickness of the ice?
Yeah, okay.
The top layer is only 10 centimeters. That's very thin, but I think, you know, if we were to kind of go through that top layer, we'd still be held by the bottom layer, which is about 20 centimeters thick. What do you think?
Yep, or we're going for a polar bear swim. Okay.
The sediment at the bottom of the lake is like a time machine, with thousands of years of mineral deposits waiting to reveal their secrets.
What we can do is compare that pre-industrial part of the record to what we see has happened in the last 100 years, right up to the present, and see how unusual it's been relative to what's happened in the past, before humans began to discharge large amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
Why don't we go ahead and lower the pig now?
Okay. What we're doing now is lowering this weighted tube down to the top of the core barrel.
Every tap now of this weighted PVC tube is driving that core in about 10 to 20 years, each tap.
It's also good exercise.
We've far exceeded our lifetime in terms of sedimentation right now. We're close.
We're getting about a full core barrel here.
We're definitely 700-800 years now.
Okay.
Okay. I'd say let's bring it up. Let's not be greedy.
The academic work these scientists do requires some heavy lifting.
Pig. Okay, here it comes. Here it comes. Okay. Okay, so, oh yeah, we got a full tube of mud here. So,
mud on the outside. Basically got a good core.
By studying the chemical makeup of the layers of sediment, Brian and John will be able to add to the existing body of research that shows how quickly Garibaldi's glaciers are melting.
The sediment in the lakes in Garibaldi Park are layered, and they're layered annually. So you've got a kind of a recorder of time at a very high resolution that allows you to reconstruct events.
by using a whole number of different lakes, we can say something about how glaciers collectively have responded to past climate change. And by understanding how they responded in the past, we have some idea about how they're likely to respond in the future. So this was a large flood in 1991, this guy right here. If 998 scientists conclude the Earth is warming, and 2 say that it's not, who are you going to believe? But you can see some fairly large events here. We can run experiments with and without excess CO2, and we can see that that CO2 makes a profound difference. It warms the planet.
Canada has to rethink its whole position on, the use of fossil fuels.
What do we want to be known for? What's our legacy to the world as Canadians? Do we want to be known as stewards of the planet? Do we want to be known as intense on economic development? We have to have a balanced approach.
If Garibaldi's glaciers are melting before our eyes, it means the habitat for one of its most elusive residents is also disappearing. Garibaldi's vast backcountry and mountain ranges make it appealing for both park visitors and one of the world's most mysterious mammals, the wolverine.
Wolverines are one of the priority wildlife conservation species in British Columbia. They're relatively rare. They're not doing probably as well as they might have in the past. They're little sticks of dynamite. They are capable of scaling mountains like no tomorrow. For an animal that's of that size, moving 10, 15 kilometers in a day during winter is no problem up and over a mountain range.
Carnivore specialist Rich Weir believes the wolverine's biggest threat is man-made and could potentially wipe out the entire species.
Wolverines are really highly adapted for a really narrow, what we call ecological niche. So they only can really live in a very narrow range of habitats. And a lot of that has to do with snow and the food that's available there. So wolverines only occur particularly where there's snow that lasts until the middle of May. So Garibaldi, with its consistent snow cover that lasts a long period of time, is an ideal spot for wolverines, and it's kind of one of the further south areas that wolverines are known to occur. So one of the problems facing wolverines is that with global warming or climate change, that period of snow lasting until middle of May is going to get rarer and rarer.
Wolverines are difficult to find, let alone capture, so studying them can be challenging.
We know very little about the genetics of these animals and how they're related to other populations in the South Coast and all the way down to Washington State.
Rich and his colleague, biologist Cliff Netveld, are hoping baited sites like this will help gather DNA to better understand wolverine behavior.
We can assess, how these wolverines are connected across the landscape and even look at things like habitat fragmentation over a much broader area.
Right.
And we know very little, if anything, about these animals on the south coast of British Columbia. So this is a really great first step into building a picture on the ecology of these animals on the south coast.
But first, they must lure the wolverine into position.
Okay, Rich, so here we have the chunk of beaver bait that we're using. It's frozen, like you can see. We run an aircraft cable through it. Try to drill through a bone if we can, so it's not going to fall off easily if a wolverine's going to try and pull down on it, or a smaller animal is going to, get away with the bait. Obviously, I don't think it's rated.
The bait is scented and placed on a homemade apparatus.
They will jump on this device, put their paws on here, and that enables them to reach for the bait, and they will pull back vigorously to try and get the bait. And you can see where these hair snaggers are facing. They push back, they will trigger this hair snagger, and then boom, you got your hair. So this has been very useful in getting wolverines to get a clear shot of their chest, and even in some cases you can assess what sex they are.
Images collected by trail cameras will be used by researchers to help identify individual wolverines.
When you look at their underside, they have very distinctive coloration, like we call them chest patches, of their neck and chest regions, and we can actually use that to identify the different animals, and it's incredibly variable.
Wolverines go to great lengths in search of food.
Wolverines are actually really efficient predators. They will actually take down a full-size caribou.
Despite their impressive strength, wolverines won't be able to fight off future development. Garibaldi has attracted the attention of developers who want to transform the park into a tourist attraction like Whistler, its next-door neighbor.
So this is Whistler Mountain ski area. This all used to be part of Garibaldi Park. Everything we're looking here to our left was in Garibaldi Park, and then by quick order in council was taken out of the park and made part of the ski area, much to the protest of the ski mountaineers and ski tours. There's your classic shot of commercialization of the park. And if it wasn't for Garibaldi Park, there'd be pressure, you know, for a couple more ski areas. And I mean, at one point there was even a proposal to put a road up into the Black Tusk Meadows, the most pristine part of Garibaldi Park.
One of the biggest threats we have is encroachment on park boundaries and also proposals for inside the park for commercial development. And it's that balance between conservation and recreation. The long-term vision for BC Parks is to protect the wilderness here and protect it from commercial development and keep it wild and natural.
Brome Ridge right here has been the site of a proposed ski area for many years. Now, the developers maintain that they're going to stay outside of the park. However, we saw at Whistler that there was then tremendous pressure put on the provincial government to, in fact, allow the ski area, the Whistler ski area, to expand into what was then the park. This is a very well-known goat habitat, and if we allow snowmobiling to go into the park or a ski area to be expanded into the park, that would really create a major problem in terms of the impact on wildlife.
Even though there is resistance to commercial development, it is important that the park is available for tourists.
If this was not a park, you'd see far, far more activity, you know, that is commercial activity coming into the park. And because it is such a unique, really a world-class place, it makes Garibaldi Park a really special place, a place that really is worth preserving for future generations.
Visitors are Garibaldi's first line of defense.
This park is part of the heritage of British Columbia, really. It's part of our character, it's part of our value, and we have to treat it as a treasure.
The more people that visit this place and respect it, the more chance we have at protecting it for the long term.
It's something that we all should cherish and look after and make sure that we don't damage this, because they don't make any more of it.
In the winter, British Columbia's Liard River Hot Springs Provincial Park transforms into a wonderland.
Nobody forgets ever being here once even, and it's on everybody's list.
Animals once on the verge of extinction.
They are free roaming, and they are very, very special animals spiritually and culturally to many people.
Share the park with some of the smallest on the planet.
Hotwater Fisa are listed as being endangered. This is the only place in the world where we find this particular species.
The park is home to one of the world's top 5 hot springs.
I believe we still have to learn a lot about water and what water does to us.
But today, there is a threat which could destroy the park and the wildlife who call it home. Driving along the Alaska Highway can feel like you're far from civilization.
We're at mile 496 on the Alaska Highway. We're literally in the middle of nowhere.
Along this isolated stretch of road is one of British Columbia's most remote provincial parks.
Here we are at Liard River Hot Springs Park, which is about a 3.5–4 hour drive north of Fort Nelson, which is the most northerly town and the closest town in the province of BC. It's a relatively small park, about 2,000 hectares.
The area was designated a protected wilderness park in 1956.
We've done the best we can to leave things as natural as possible and yet still accessible to people. The power grid stops about 20 minutes north of Fort Nelson. Off the grid, as they say.
Area Supervisor Al Hansen believes the park's appeal is its remoteness.
You gotta make your own way up here, and it's certainly not for everybody, but it works for a lot of us. Everybody that lives up here in the general area of Liard and Muncho is they produce their own power or they don't have it. So it's pretty rustic even after all these years.
In northeastern British Columbia, Liard River Hot Springs Provincial Park joins Liard River Corridor Park to protect more than 90,000 hectares of wilderness.
We have sheep, there's elk, there's moose, there's bear, there's wolves, there's all our fur-bearing animals are in this country. There's no trails you can take that are cut for you to walk up to the top of that mountain. It's a trail that you're gonna have to make your own self and pick your own way.
Rick Seidel and his 2 teenage sons are veterans at navigating the park's backcountry. Here, common sense and preparation saves lives. This landscape and all its beauty can easily turn deadly.
In the area like right now, it's nice and warm, but this could change by next week. It could go down to minus 30 below, and you could have a blizzard snowstorm up here. And if you're not prepared for it, that's where it'll bite you back.
We got spare belts in case it's blowing. We got all sorts of medical gear and just got our utility knives and saws. So we got our spark plugs. And out here, it depends on the season and the weather. Like sometimes getting stuck in some deep snow or just the embankments, you gotta be careful you don't go off an embankment or get stuck anywhere. Or breaking down is a big fear. You gotta be ready to fix it and do your best to. Leave it if you have to, but that's why it's best to bring a buddy, bring a friend.
Looks like we got a moose kill here. Wolves must have come in on this open line. The moose would have been traveling along on here, and then the wolves would have come in and surrounded it, and this is where they would have caught it out here, and they knocked it down. They'll be back here in a few days, probably.
The park is also home to North America's largest land animal. Wood bison roam freely along the side of the Alaska Highway.
They're of the purest genetic stock that I am aware of in the world. And so they are really linked to prehistoric bison that used to roam through northern British Columbia.
In the 1800s, it was estimated that 170,000 bison lived in Canada. By the early 1900s, overhunting and changes to the landscape decimated the population to near extinction. The last bison in British Columbia was shot outside Fort St. John in 1906. Reintroducing the animal to its natural habitats has been a 30-year project. Bison are still red-listed as threatened. In 1995, 49 wood bison were reintroduced to Liard River Corridor Park and strategically placed near Nordquist Lake among a rich food supply.
The vegetation that was there grew very, very tall, and it was almost impenetrable by the bison.
The herd found another, more nutritious food source that was easier to access. Unfortunately, the bison have picked a deadly spot for dinner. But it's not predatory animals which are killing the bison. It's passing motorists. The herd relocated themselves to the Alaska Highway bordering the park. The animals are spending so much time by the roadway that they have become desensitized to traffic. Biologists are studying the Nordquist herd's seasonal movements in an effort to lure them off the highway and back to safer ground inside the park.
A couple of these bulls were tranquilized and helicoptered back to Nordquist Lake, but the attraction to the road and to roaming was very strong, and more bulls went out, and then the cows, from what I understand, followed.
I've seen them move through 3 feet, 4 feet of snow, and they're just like a little D6 cat plowing through it.
Area Supervisor Al Hansen is looking for 3 GPS-collared bison. The collars will help identify where and when the bison move.
And here we go, we have bison. The mission tomorrow is to get close enough to capture them with a tranquilizer dart and remove the collars.
So right now I'm just getting set up for loading some darts. The drugs we're using on these bison are 2, a mixture of drugs. One is a narcotic called carfentanil, and the second is a sedative called xylazine.
The combined drugs can kill a person within minutes. It is essential that the antidote is ready and that safety protocols are understood.
So if, in the event of an accident, there's 2 ways to give this reversal agent. When I first learned how to do this, we were told to give it in the tongue. The tongue has a very good blood supply and the drug would be absorbed really quickly. However, I would prefer that if I do have an accident, someone takes the reversal agent, slams it into my thigh, and goes like that really quickly.
For the next 3 days, this research team will drive in a caravan, closing off portions of the highway as the bison are spotted.
I do have it. Well, there's too much stuff in the way. That's a pretty risky shot.
If you come out to where you
Come
are
out.
right here.
Have a look, Helen.
That's a long shot.
That's a long shot?
That's a long shot with a dart gun. Get as clear a line as you can, and then start walking.
And then start walking in, and then when she gets up,
that and nail her. Yeah. I don't really know what they're going to do in the future.
I'm never going to say 100% because I have experience where they've all charged right at us to the thing, eh? Full bore.
Yeah.
So just try and get as close as you can and wait till she stands up before you shoot.
The team's safety lies with their conservation officer. This is the first time he has darted a bison. Retrieving a GPS collar from an adult bison can be risky. The team stands by in anticipation. A steady hand is required despite the freezing temperatures of -25.
There she is, right there, Al.
The collar is removed. Then a DNA sample is taken.
I'm taking some hair samples for DNA. We have a lot of interest in bison genetics in the world, and they've asked me to collect some DNA for them. The skin's so thick on these guys.
Blood samples are drawn, followed by a rectal exam.
So we just clear the feces out of her rectum first, make room for my hand, and she's pregnant.
Is she? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's exciting.
With DNA samples complete, the reversal drug needs to be injected immediately. Without it, muscle damage can set in.
And usually what I do is give about a third in the vein and the rest into the muscle. And that means they're usually up in about 4 to 6 minutes.
But finding a good vein on this aging bison proves difficult.
I kind of screwed it up last time. So I'm just going to give it most of it in the muscle. So there's a little bit in the muscle, and then a little bit under the skin where it's absorbed a little bit slower. So we've done that at 12:34, and now we need to leave.
After ensuring the animal is fully recovered and behaving normally, the team moves on to find the second collared bison. Locating the animal could take them all the way to the Yukon, 3 hours away.
Micah, you want to take another look in your binocs and make sure it's still her at the bottom, at the back? That looks like a big lump.
The sighting is confirmed, but the herd senses humans are present.
The way she goes sometimes. We'll get her tomorrow.
126.70270. Okay, thank you. Yep.
What's all that?
Just the GPS coordinates of the location of the herd. We record it. So we have location data for them, as well as the classification of the group as cows, calves, and bulls, if there are any. We don't think it's a growing population just based on recruitment is likely taken away by highway mortality. But we don't really have good data on recruitment, on the number of calves that survive, or what the actual mortality is on the highway at this point.
Past attempts have been made to keep the bison off the highway, but all have failed. The animals are as determined as the researchers hoping to save them.
When they were first reintroduced, there was sort of a drift fence put up. Bison are not, they don't like fences, and they'll just go through them. So we're going to have to really look at habitat options for how to keep them in their natural habitat and off the highway.
Liard River Hot Springs Provincial Park is home to another animal facing an uncertain future. Yet it could not be more different from the bison.
We're studying hot water FISA, which is an endangered snail in Canada. It's the only place in the world the species occurs.
So what we do is pick an area of stream that's accessible, and hopefully we don't disturb too many other snails because it's mostly gravel in the middle. And then we cut out an area of the chara carefully.
For research scientists Jennifer Heron and Nadine Pinnell, working in this hot spring comes with strict guidelines. Hot water FISA are protected under the Species at Risk Act, so the research team had to obtain a special permit from Fisheries and Oceans Canada for today's work.
We just pull up bits at a time, sort through it until we find one.
That's a lot of clout for such a tiny snail.
Smaller snails are about 3 millimeters long, a little less, and the larger snails can reach up to 9 millimeters long. They're about the size of a popcorn kernel.
A population count provides insight on how snail numbers fluctuate over time. The researchers are also tracking temperature changes in the hot springs.
This is called a shuttle. And then in here we have staked down, these are the temperature loggers. And these loggers take temperature readings every day. We keep them in here for about 6 months or so. Every time, and then come back and take the data off of them.
Counting the snails is difficult. If the snails are out of the water for too long, they can freeze to death.
I've seen quite a few bigger ones.
A small aquarium filled with water from the hot spring is held over the snails to magnify them while they are studied. Orange flags identify key areas, helping to expedite the research process.
When we're seeing this chart and we might just see 2 or 3 snails on top, there might be, it could be that there's like 100 snails within that area.
We also record other things like the substrate, the amount of chara, the stream flow, whether there's an underbank, whether there's sticks or logs in between, which may not allow us to count. Hot water FISA feed on algae and bacteria. They spend a lot of time in the chara mats. either avoiding predators, so they'll stay within that chara, or they're grazing within the chara.
So, yeah, so you can see there's a couple just there on the log.
Counting the snails puts a strain on the park's delicate ecosystem. Researchers are hoping modern-day technology can one day substitute having to visit the site in person.
They want to set up monitoring stations that they can take photographs or film and therefore count the snails and monitor if there's changes over time. So if once they've downloaded data, if there's not snails within the view of the camera for a while, perhaps something's happened.
For now, the park provides a safe haven for the snails. But a potential man-made threat looms over Liard, which could do catastrophic damage to its hot springs. Along this lonely stretch of the Alaska Highway lies a hidden gem inside British Columbia's Liard River Hot Springs Provincial Park.
That's a pretty unique experience for folks to go swimming when it's -50 even.
The park is home to natural hot springs. The sulfate-rich Alpha Pool is Liard's crown jewel.
I don't think anybody drives the Alaska Highway without stopping at Liard River Hot Springs because it is a pretty unique spot.
The Alpha Pool is the second largest natural hot spring in Canada.
We have various facilities like the boardwalk and decking area and that.
Temperatures in the hot spring exceed 50 degrees Celsius, warming visitors on a cold winter day when air temperatures can drop to -50.
If you're afraid of being burned by hot water, you step in at the far end of the pool, and then if you have some courage, you walk up and up and up and get hotter and hotter and hotter.
Hydrologist Gilles Wendling studied the hot springs at Liard to determine their source.
A few years ago, we got the mandate to try to understand what was behind the hot spring that we can see here. And so where was the water coming from? Why was it hot? And so we looked at the region, and we also looked at the chemistry of the water, and we tried to solve the puzzle. So the water falls on the ridge, precipitates on the ridge as rain and snow, and then it melts and it gets into the fractures in the bedrock, and it goes to a depth of about 3.4 kilometers. It reaches a temperature of 120 degrees, and then it goes back up to surface to daylight, and it is what forms the Liard Hot Springs.
Because the water is heated below ground, any activity under the Earth's surface could potentially destroy the hot springs.
Anything from a minor earthquake to, say, seismic activities or fracking type activities associated with oil and gas, if it was allowed to happen right up to a park boundary, which on a very small 2,000 hectare park could have some pretty severe impacts on the values in the park. I mean, it could conceivably stop the water flow kind of thing.
30,000 oil and gas wells are spread throughout northeastern British Columbia, and the numbers continue to rise. Recent discoveries of massive deposits of shale gas in the Liard Basin lure industrial development towards the park.
We know that there is potential, there is gas in the subsurface. I think it's very important that we understand better how water moves at surface, in the subsurface, how the surface water and the groundwater are connected, so that when we have hundreds or thousands of wells, that we don't jeopardize what's happening with the water.
Natural gas is extracted by hydraulic fracturing, commonly known as fracking. Explosions fracture the bedrock, and millions of gallons of water, sand, and chemicals are forced in, allowing natural gas to flow out.
Unfortunately, there is always a risk that the seal won't be installed properly. Over 1,000 wells, there is probably 5 or 10 or 15 wells that won't be sealed properly.
Opponents to fracking believe it pollutes groundwater and puts intense pressure on bedrock structures beneath the ground, which could destroy the hot springs. So far, Liard River Hot Springs Park and Corridor Park are protected from industrial development, but things could change.
One of my key recommendations is that we need to do our homework. We need to understand what nature is giving us and how is nature working. And then if we start activities, what is the risk of disturbing this balance and what would be the consequences and the long-term consequences. So I think it's just a question of knowing and being steward of what nature has provided us to us. And here, I mean, it's so beautiful. Nature is so magnificent.
For British Columbia's native population, this land and water represents a deep spiritual and cultural connection. The area surrounding the park is the traditional home of the Cascadene people.
It's a healing place. Also for our people to just get out on the land and contemplate and express our culture and retain that connection to the land, if you will. This location is like a part of our soul. We believe that in terms of an agenda with government, we have to set an understanding in terms of what is going to be the basis of managing this park.
Decisions are still being made about this oasis in the wilderness. Decisions which affect the hot springs, the snails, and the bison.
There's deep history, there's deep meaning, there's deep use, there's deep value, and that connection can never be taken away.
For me, it's just an illustration of how complex nature can be and how beautiful nature can be.
I'll retire probably, well, there's no doubt I'm going to retire up here. Once I came up and worked here, I didn't want to work anywhere else or doing anything else. And so here I am, even 23 years later. So pretty special spot, and yeah, enough said.